Imagine a chessboard where every player is obsessed with making the final move. They strain to capture the king, to be the one who ends the game. But masters know, the real artistry lies in the move no one sees coming, the voluntary retreat that opens an unseen path to victory. History, both personal and political, remembers those who step away on their own terms. In relationships, negotiations, even wars, the one who withdraws first often leaves behind a silence louder than any declaration. Carl Jung saw withdrawal not as defeat, but as individuation in action, the conscious separation from patterns that drain you, so you can return to yourself whole. To him, individuation was not isolation, but the reclamation of the self from the grasp of external forces. Walking away first shifts the psychological balance. It reframes you from a dependent participant to an independent architect of your own timeline. This isn't just theory. In 1968, during the Paris peace talks over the Vietnam War, negotiators famously walked out early, not because they lacked resolve, but because they wanted to reset the dynamic. That early exit forced the opposing side to reconsider concessions. It's a tactic that echoes in business, politics, and personal lives. When you control the moment of separation, you control the frame of the story. Philosopher Sun Tzu hinted at this in The Art of War. He who knows when he can fight and when he cannot will be victorious. Strategic withdrawal isn't flight. It's choosing the ground on which you will meet again. Jung would say that by acting from a place of conscious choice rather than fear, you step outside the unconscious loop that keeps you tethered. Think of it like the Japanese concept of ma, the intentional pause or emptiness that gives shape to what follows. In conversation, that might mean leaving before the energy wanes. In love, it might mean stepping back before affection erodes into habit. By moving first, you create a vacuum, and nature and human psychology hates a vacuum. Pause for a moment. Where in your life are you still waiting for someone else to make the first move? And what would happen if you reclaimed that moment for yourself? Anticipation as power picture. A stage before the curtain rises. The audience leans forward, hearts beating in sync, not because of what's happening, but because of what might happen. This is the quiet electricity of anticipation, and it's one of the most underused forms of psychological leverage. When you withdraw first, you plant the seed of uncertainty in the other person's mind. You move from being predictable to becoming the unanswered question they can't stop turning over. Neuroscience shows that our brains reward uncertainty with dopamine surges. Antonio Damasio, in his work on decision-making and emotion, notes that the mind finds greater stimulation in unresolved situations than in predictable outcomes. By exiting first, you create precisely that unresolved space. You become the mystery that needs decoding. Jung understood this through the lens of archetypes. The seeker archetype doesn't linger in rooms that have no more to teach them. They step into the unknown, pulling others into their orbit of curiosity. This is not manipulation. It's the recognition that energy flows toward what moves, not what clings. In Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power, Law 16, use absence to increase respect and honor, outlines how intentional scarcity magnifies perceived value. But Greene's law is often misunderstood. It's not about vanishing to punish, but about timing your withdrawal so that the absence itself becomes a silent invitation. History offers striking examples. In 1965, French President Charles de Gaulle unexpectedly pulled France from NATO's integrated military command. The move shocked allies and adversaries alike, forcing them to re-engage with France on new terms. De Gaulle didn't leave the table because he was losing influence. He left to redefine it. Even cinema captures this power. In Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love, restraint is more magnetic than any declaration. The character's withheld gestures and delayed partings keep the audience suspended in longing. The absence of action becomes the action. Ancient wisdom points in the same direction. The Bhagavad Gita teaches detachment not as indifference, but as mastery over the pull of outcome. When you are not bound by the need to stay until the end, you move from a reactive role to an initiating force. This principle isn't limited to grand strategy. In personal life, leaving first, whether from a conversation, a partnership, or even a job, can subtly reframe the power dynamic. People tend to attribute higher value to what exits before it exhausts its relevance. Take a breath. Who in your life expects you to always be the last to leave? And what might shift if you chose just once to step away while they still want you there? Jung's shadow warning. Most people don't withdraw first, not because they don't sense the right moment, but because an invisible tether holds them in place, the fear of being abandoned. Jung warned that when we refuse to step away, it's often the shadow speaking, the part of us that equates solitude with rejection, that would rather endure slow erosion than face the echo of emptiness. The shadow, in Jung's framework, is not evil. It's simply the unacknowledged side of the psyche, the fears, desires, and instincts we keep hidden. And one of its most persistent whispers is, if you leave first, you will be forgotten. Left unchecked, this whisper becomes a compulsion to stay too long in situations that have already ended in spirit. Brené Brown, in Daring Greatly, calls this foreboding joy. The inability to trust moments of contentment without bracing for loss. We preemptively cling, thinking we can stop the loss from coming. But in reality, this clinging often accelerates the disconnection we fear. Consider the 16th century samurai code, Bushido, which held that a warrior must accept death before stepping onto the battlefield. In relationships, the same principle applies. Only when we have accepted the possibility of being alone can we act with clarity instead of desperation. The fear of loneliness blurs timing. The acceptance of it sharpens it. Jung often emphasized individuation as the path out of shadow bondage. By consciously bringing our fear into the light, we no longer let it dictate the timing of our exits. Shadow work might involve remembering the first time you felt left behind and realizing that moment didn't define your worth. As Rumi wrote, "Don't get lost in your pain. Know that one day your pain will become your cure." Withdrawal, when rooted in self-awareness, becomes that cure. The 2019 film Marriage Story offers a modern portrayal of this. The characters stay entangled long after the marriage has emotionally dissolved, each fearing the finality of separation. Their delay leads not to preservation, but to a slower, more painful unraveling. Spiritual texts echo the same truth. In the Tao Te Ching, Laozi writes, "To hold, one must first open the hand." Sometimes the only way to keep your dignity, and even the respect of others, is to leave before your presence becomes a shadow of itself. So here's the reflection. What if withdrawing first isn't about avoiding abandonment, but about reclaiming your freedom from the shadow's grip? What might you gain by leaving not from fear, but from fullness? The law of psychological distance. In physics, distance changes perspective. A mountain looks different from the base than it does from miles away. The same law applies to human relationships. When you step back, the emotional terrain shifts, and what was once taken for granted suddenly becomes visible in sharper relief. This is the essence of psychological distance, the strategic space that transforms how you're perceived and remembered. Carl Jung understood that proximity without pause can dull awareness. When we are constantly present, we risk becoming part of the background, like wallpaper that once caught the eye, but now blends unnoticed into the room. Psychological distance, however, renews perception. It reminds others of your contours, your boundaries, your irreplaceable qualities. Robert Greene explores this in The Art of Seduction, describing how absence creates an emotional vacuum. In human nature, absence is rarely neutral. It triggers longing, curiosity, and projection. People fill the gap with imagined qualities, often elevating your presence beyond what it was when you were constantly available. Greene warns, though, that this only works when the withdrawal is intentional and timed before your presence loses its luster. Neuroscientific research backs this up. Martin Seligman's work on positive psychology shows that novelty and intermittent interaction sustain engagement far more than constant exposure. A sudden, well-timed absence reactivates the brain's reward systems, making any future contact more impactful. History offers vivid examples. In 1977, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat abruptly announced he would visit Israel, but before the trip, he went silent. That pause in communication intensified global attention, making his eventual arrival a historic turning point. His calculated space made the act itself resonate louder. Cinema has captured this power beautifully. In Casablanca, Rick's unexpected emotional withdrawal from Ilsa doesn't diminish the connection. It magnifies it. Every glance afterward carries more weight because of the distance he created. The restraint becomes the spark. Ancient wisdom has long recognized this principle. The Quran advises moderation in all things, a rhythm of approach and retreat, which in relationships means knowing when presence serves connection and when it suffocates it. The Bhagavad Gita, too, speaks of non-attachment as a way to maintain clarity. You can appreciate more when you're not bound to constant possession. Reflection prompt. Who in your life has grown accustomed to your constant presence? And if you were to step back, not out of resentment, but as a conscious choice, what might they suddenly see in you that they've been overlooking? Ancient precedents. Long before modern psychology named the effects of withdrawal, ancient strategists, warriors, and philosophers had already mastered its art. They understood that stepping back at the right moment was not retreat in shame, but a maneuver to reposition for greater advantage. In fact, some of history's most decisive victories were won not by charging forward, but by stepping away. Sun Tzu in The Art of War warns against fighting every battle head-on. He writes, "To secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself." Strategic withdrawal, to Sun Tzu, was a way to lure the opponent into overextension, letting their confidence blind them to the trap being set. When you withdraw first, you're not leaving the field. You're inviting the other to move into a space you now control. The samurai ethos carried a similar principle. Within Bushido, there's the concept of Katsu Jin Ken, the life-giving sword. A true warrior knows when to strike and when to stay the blade. Stepping back from a fight could preserve life, dignity, and future strength, both your own and even that of your opponent. Such a pause wasn't weakness. It was a display of mastery over ego and impulse. Ancient Greece offers another lens. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that power lies not in controlling others, but in controlling yourself. Voluntary withdrawal was the ultimate act of self-command. Removing yourself before circumstances or others forced the choice upon you. Even spiritual traditions mirror this strategy. The Quran speaks of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, withdrawing to the cave of Hira for solitude and revelation, stepping back from the noise of society to gain the clarity needed for transformative action. In the same way, stepping away from a situation can allow for the insight that constant involvement obscures. A vivid historical example comes from Hannibal during the Second Punic War. After securing a major victory, he refrained from pursuing Rome immediately. His pause was calculated, meant to consolidate resources and unsettle the enemy. Though later criticized for not pressing the advantage, historians still note how his selective withdrawals prolonged his strategic edge. Film echoes these ancient truths. In The Last Samurai, the protagonist's willingness to withdraw from immediate conflict allows him to absorb the ethos and discipline of his new allies, ultimately making him a more formidable force when he returns to the fight. So ask yourself, in your own battles, whether emotional, professional, or personal, are you staying simply because movement feels like loss? Or could stepping back, as the ancients did, actually place you in the strongest position you've ever been? Breaking the predictability cycle. Human beings are creatures of pattern. We find safety in routines. The same greeting in the morning, the same tone in conversation, the same responses to conflict. While patterns provide comfort, they also breed complacency. In relationships, whether personal or professional, predictability can slowly erode attention and appreciation. The brain, wired for novelty, begins to tune out what it has already mapped. Withdrawing first is one of the most effective ways to disrupt this cycle. It interrupts the expected sequence, creating a gap where curiosity and alertness can reawaken. Jung might describe this as an archetypal break, the moment when a recurring story is interrupted, forcing both people to confront the unconscious roles they've been playing. By stepping away before the script reaches its usual ending, you signal that you are not bound to the same loop. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman's work on cognitive bias sheds light on why this works. In his studies on human attention, he observed that people notice change more than continuity. If you've always been the one to linger, always available, your sudden and intentional absence triggers the brain's novelty bias, making your presence, past and future, more significant in memory. This principle isn't about games, it's about resetting awareness. In Groundhog Day, the protagonist is trapped in the same day until he changes his behavior. It's only when he breaks the cycle, altering his responses and withdrawing from habitual patterns, that the story moves forward. In life too, cycles end not because they time out naturally, but because someone changes the rhythm. Spiritual traditions frame this as a renewal of perspective. In the Tao Te Ching, Laozi emphasizes the value of emptiness. We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. Predictability fills every space. Withdrawal creates emptiness that can once again hold meaning. Historical leadership offers a striking example. Abraham Lincoln, during critical moments of the Civil War, would deliberately step away from the political battlefield, retreating to the War Department's telegraph office or into solitary walks. These pauses disrupted not just his own stress cycle, but the expectations of his advisors, often leading to clearer, more decisive strategy upon his return. Here's a quiet truth worth sitting with. If you never break the pattern will break you. Consider where in your life people could recite your next move before you make it. What if your first unexpected step was simply to step away? The brain chemistry of absence is not empty space. It's a neurological trigger. The moment you withdraw, the brain of the person you step away from begins firing in patterns that are both ancient and powerful. Our nervous systems evolved to respond more intensely to uncertainty than to stability. This is why the absence of something, or someone, can feel more potent than their constant presence. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio explains that uncertainty activates the brain's reward circuitry, particularly the release of dopamine. Contrary to popular belief, dopamine isn't a pleasure chemical. It's a molecule of anticipation. It fuels the search, the waiting, the imagining. When you withdraw first, you remove immediate gratification, forcing the other person into a heightened state of mental engagement. They replay conversations, analyze your motives, and construct imagined scenarios, often amplifying your importance in their mind. Jung understood this from a symbolic perspective. The archetype of the absent figure appears in myths across cultures. The mentor who vanishes before the hero is ready, the lover who disappears at the height of passion. This absence is not cruelty, it's initiation. It forces the one left behind to grow, to pursue, to awaken dormant parts of themselves. Robert Cialdini, in Influence, identifies scarcity as one of the most persuasive forces in human decision-making. When something becomes less available, its perceived value spikes. Absence is the purest form of scarcity, and unlike material goods, your presence cannot be replaced or duplicated. Cinema often captures this truth with painful beauty. Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love thrives on what isn't shown. Glances, near touches, moments where characters withdraw at the edge of confession. The restraint, the unfulfilled moment, leaves the audience longing more than 1,000 declarations could. Spiritual wisdom also points here. The Sufi poet Hafiz wrote, "Don't surrender your loneliness so quickly. Let it cut more deep." Absence, when intentional, is a teacher. It shapes not only how others perceive you, but how you perceive yourself in the silence that follows. Consider historical diplomacy. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, U.S. negotiators deliberately slowed communication at certain points, creating space for the Soviet side to feel the tension and reconsider escalation. In that suspended air, the possibility of catastrophe forced more careful thought. Reflection. What if your absence could speak louder than your presence ever has? And if you allowed space to form, not as punishment, but as an invitation, who might lean forward to fill it? Avoiding the ego trap. Withdrawing first can be a powerful act, but it's also dangerously easy to corrupt with ego. The difference between strategic withdrawal and ghosting lies in intention. One is rooted in clarity, respect, and self-possession. The other in avoidance, resentment, or the desire to wound. Jung would caution that when the shadow takes the wheel, even the most skillful tactic becomes self-sabotage. The ego trap shows up when withdrawal becomes a performance, a way to teach someone a lesson or prove superiority. While it may feel momentarily satisfying, this kind of exit often backfires. It communicates not strength, but insecurity. In The Untethered Soul, Michael A. Singer reminds us that freedom comes from releasing the need to control how others perceive us. True strategic withdrawal doesn't hinge on their reaction. It's valuable even if no one notices, because it's aligned with your own boundaries and growth. Ego-driven exits also close doors that might one day be worth walking through again. Consider the difference between a samurai stepping back from battle to reassess and a soldier throwing down his sword in defiance. The first leaves open the possibility of honorable re-engagement. The second leaves only resentment in its wake. A historical cautionary tale comes from Charles V of Spain, who, after years of rule, abdicated and withdrew to a monastery. While his retreat was genuine, some of his earlier pride-driven withdrawals from political negotiations had alienated allies permanently. His later attempts at influence were weakened because those withdrawals had been read as arrogance rather than strategy. Cinema gives us a contrasting example in Heat, 1995. Robert De Niro's character lives by a code. Don't let yourself get attached to anything you are not willing to walk out on, in 30 seconds flat. While his detachment allows him to survive in his world, it's ultimately ego, the refusal to let go of pride, that becomes his downfall. It's a reminder that cold withdrawal without deeper purpose can erode the very freedom it seeks to protect. Spiritual traditions emphasize intention over appearance. The Bhagavad Gita advises action without attachment to the fruits of that action. Applied here, it means withdrawing not to prove a point, but to remain in harmony with your own center. So before you step away, ask yourself, is this movement toward inner alignment or an attempt to control someone else's perception? If the answer is the latter, it's not strategy, it's the shadow in disguise. The return window, stepping away first, is only half of the strategy. The other half lies in knowing when and how to return. A well-timed reappearance can magnify your influence far more than your initial withdrawal ever could. The gap you create becomes a frame, and your return is the painting that fills it. But if you reappear too soon, you collapse the tension. Too late, and the space you created hardens into distance. Carl Jung might call this the enantiodromia effect, the tendency for one force to transform into its opposite when pushed to an extreme. Too much absence can shift intrigue into indifference. The art lies in sensing the pivot point, when curiosity peaks, but before it curdles into detachment. History offers striking lessons. Napoleon was a master of retreat and return. After suffering setbacks, he would step back, regroup his forces, and re-enter the battlefield when the enemy had overextended. His 1797 Italian campaign remains a classic example. His strategic pauses created openings his adversaries could not anticipate, making his comeback more forceful than his presence had been before. Psychology mirrors this principle. In attachment theory, John Bowlby observed that reunion after separation often intensifies bonds, provided the separation was not perceived as abandonment. This is why a controlled, intentional absence can lead to a warmer, more attentive reception upon return, as long as the emotional bridge was never fully burned. Cinema captures this masterfully in The Godfather Part 2, where Michael Corleone withdraws into secrecy during critical power plays, only to resurface at moments that redefine the balance of power. The silence between appearances amplifies his authority. Even spiritual traditions hold space for the return. In the Christian Gospels, Jesus withdraws into solitude before re-entering the public sphere with renewed clarity and impact. In Sufi practice, periods of khalwa, seclusion, are followed by jalwa, return to the world. The latter being when insights are embodied and shared. The key is intention. Your re-entry should not be about proving you were missed, but about bringing something new, a fresh perspective, renewed energy, or a shifted stance that validates the space you took. Reflection. If you were to step back now, what would you need to gather, learn, or transform so that your eventual return would not just be noticed, but welcomed? The withdrawal gains meaning not in the leaving, but in what you bring back with you. Protecting emotional sovereignty. Emotional sovereignty means you are the keeper of your own state of mind, not a tenant in someone else's emotional landscape. It is the capacity to remain centered, regardless of who enters or leaves your life. Withdrawing first, when done with awareness, is one of the strongest safeguards of this sovereignty, because it prevents you from letting attachment morph into dependency. Carl Jung saw individuation as the process of becoming whole within yourself, rather than seeking wholeness in others. The danger of staying too long in any dynamic is that your sense of self begins to blend into it. Like a drop of ink in water, you slowly dissolve until you can no longer distinguish where you end and they begin. Withdrawal interrupts that dissolution. It's the conscious act of saying, I exist outside this connection, and my worth is not contingent on its continuation. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our power to choose. Strategic withdrawal is the embodiment of that space. You are no longer reacting automatically to emotional cues. You are choosing your participation. History offers vivid reminders of this principle. Queen Elizabeth I of England was courted by numerous suitors, yet she never allowed herself to be bound by alliance or expectation. Her calculated distance preserved her authority and kept her from being drawn into political entanglements that could have compromised her autonomy. Her reign was not just marked by political strength, but by a refusal to let others define her path. In cinema, Eat, Pray, Love portrays a modern version of this journey. The protagonist's decision to leave her marriage and familiar life is not an escape from love, but a reclaiming of selfhood. Her physical withdrawal mirrors an inner one, a deliberate pulling back from the patterns that had claimed her sense of identity. Spiritual texts echo the same wisdom. The Dhammapada teaches, if you find no one to support you on the spiritual path, walk alone. This is not a call to isolation, but to self-possession, to ensuring your emotional stability is anchored within, not in the shifting tides of another's attention. Reflection. If you measured your self-worth without counting anyone else's opinion, would it rise or fall? And if you knew your center could not be shaken, how much easier would it be to walk away at the moment you know you should? The ripple effect. When you withdraw first, the impact rarely stops with the person or situation you've stepped away from. Like a stone dropped into still water, the effects spread outward, touching relationships, reputations, and even the unspoken rules of your social world. People watch how you handle endings, and those observations quietly redefine how they engage with you in the future. Carl Jung observed that individuation changes the psychic field around a person. When you claim your agency in one relationship, others unconsciously register that you are not bound by the usual emotional contracts. You become someone whose boundaries are alive and self-enforced, and this shifts the way people approach you. They may not articulate it, but they sense the difference between someone who stays until pushed and someone who leaves with intentional timing. In Robert Cialdini's framework from Influence, this ripple effect connects to the principle of social proof. Others take cues from your behavior about what is acceptable, admirable, or risky. When you model that withdrawal can be dignified and decisive, you give silent permission for others to question where they might be overextending themselves. History offers strong examples. When George Washington voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms as U.S. president, his decision didn't just affect his immediate circle. It set a precedent for peaceful transitions of power, rippling across generations of governance. His withdrawal first, when he could have stayed, redefined leadership for a young nation. Cinema captures a similar ripple in A Beautiful Mind. John Nash's decision to step away from the illusions his mind presented didn't just change his marriage. It altered how colleagues, students, and the academic community viewed him. His ability to reclaim sovereignty from his internal struggles influenced everyone around him, often without direct conversation. Spiritual teachings often note this collective dimension. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna reminds Arjuna that those in positions of visibility must act with awareness because their example naturally guides others. The same applies here. Your withdrawal becomes part of the unspoken story people tell about you. The ripple effect also works inward. Every time you choose to leave from a place of clarity, you strengthen the inner muscle that resists fear-based staying. That resilience becomes visible in subtle cues: your posture, your tone, the way you navigate opportunities. Others begin to anticipate that you are not someone they can easily entangle without your consent. Reflection: if every exit you made became a silent message to your wider world, what would you want that message to be? The power is in the exit. Some believe power lies in holding on the longest, in proving endurance. But endurance without discernment can become self-betrayal. Jung knew the greater power is in letting go, not as surrender to defeat, but as a conscious declaration that your worth is not up for negotiation. The moment you choose to withdraw first, you reclaim the authorship of your story. You stop waiting for permission to step away and start defining the terms of your own presence. Think of history's turning points, moments when a leader, an artist, or an ordinary person altered the course of their life by refusing to stay a moment too long. They didn't simply leave. They exited with timing so precise that their absence became a presence in itself. George Washington's voluntary departure from the presidency, Maya Angelou walking away from exploitative contracts to protect her voice, or Nelson Mandela choosing not to run for a second term so the vision of unity could outlive him. These withdrawals were not endings. They were openings for something greater. In spiritual traditions, this truth repeats like a quiet refrain. The Tao Te Ching reminds us, when you realize nothing is lacking, the whole world belongs to you. Withdrawing first flows from that realization that you are already complete, and your staying or leaving is no longer driven by need. The Quran's stories of the Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, retreats to solitude show that stepping away can be the precursor to revelation, not retreat into obscurity. Even in cinema, the final frame can hold more weight than the loudest climax. In Lost in Translation, the whispered goodbye carries more power precisely because it is the moment of parting, not reunion. The characters leave each other not in bitterness, but in a quiet recognition that some connections are most alive in memory. So here's the truth you've known all along, but perhaps feared to act on. The first to withdraw is often the one who sets the terms for everything that follows. Absence is not nothingness. It is space charged with possibility, a silence in which others must face themselves, and perhaps face how much they valued what they thought would always be there. Take a breath. Look at the spaces in your life where you've been waiting for someone else to make the call. Ask yourself, if you walked away now, not out of anger, not to punish, but to protect the integrity of your own spirit, what door might open that you cannot yet see? If this has stirred something in you, carry it forward. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that sometimes the strongest move is not the one that holds on, but the one that lets go first.